Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Galambos, and some of you might know me here as the director and founder of EAG Innovation. We have the lovely Kirsten Frey with us today, who's going to be talking about all things grief. Now, I know grief isn't the most conventional topic, so I'd love for Kristen if you could introduce yourself and talk a bit about why grief is something you chose to pursue in your professional career.
Well, thank you, Alicia, for inviting me onto your show. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to people about grief because, ironically, even though it's something that we're all going to experience many times in our life, unfortunately, it still remains this very misunderstood topic of conversation, very uncomfortable too for a lot of people. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to open this conversation up with you today. So my name is Kirsten Frey. I am a personal transformation coach and certified grief recovery specialist. And what that means is I use a method that has been in existence for over 40 years, and it's an alternative to traditional therapy or counseling when it comes to grief. So my journey for grief, like many people, we all experience loss many times in our lives. And so I've had many losses, both professionally and personally. I was a police officer for 18 years. And so I've had many losses of friends and colleagues to both violence and suicide. And personally, I've gone through my own experiences in life with divorce, miscarriage, even empty nesting when my son left for university 4 years ago. But the one instance that really sort of tipped the edge for me was finding out 4.5 years ago that I was adopted. So that just actually blew my mind and really shook the foundation of everything that I had believed about my life and my family growing up. And ironically, all my family had passed away. So there was no real way to get answers for what had happened. So I did what I had done with most of the losses in my life up to that point, which is that I dealt with it intellectually. So I did have an emotional reaction at the time that it occurred. But then very quickly, I kind of defaulted back to my normal patterns of behavior, which was trying to figure it out in my mind, analyzing it, organizing it in my head intellectually. And so I dealt with it intellectually, but not emotionally. And so the consequences for that is that over the years, I had built up a barrier in my heart. And what had happened is I went on after about, I don't know, several weeks after this information, I felt like, okay, I've adjusted to this and I'm ready to move on. But what had happened was that I had only dealt with it intellectually and not emotionally. So over the next 18 months, what happened is I actually started to have physical manifestations. And I'm a fairly fit person. After policing, I got into personal training and holistic nutrition. So I was very aware of my body and what felt right and what didn't. But I was getting these heart palpitations and pain in my heart. And so did all the testing with my doctor. Nothing was physically wrong with me. And what happened was it was unresolved grief, not just from the adoption, but from all these other previous losses that I hadn't completed. And so I did my own work with the grief recovery method, and it was literally transformative for me. It gave me the effective tools that I needed to emotionally complete those losses. And subsequently, it shifted the entire focus of my life coaching business.
It sounds like your lived experience is incredibly evident and really allowed you to choose to pursue this career beyond all the other unique and amazing opportunities you had in your life. I think it's an incredible step forward for anyone who has such a unique experience. And speaking of the word unique, I always like to ask folks, especially other practitioners, what makes their practice unique and why someone might come see you?
Well, that's an excellent question because obviously there are so many different types of counseling and therapy out there. And I just want to make sure that I make it really clear that I am not a therapist or a counselor. I am a coach and a certified grief recovery specialist through the Grief Recovery Institute in the United States. And their program, the Grief Recovery Method, has been around for 40 years and has helped countless number of grievers through multiple different kinds of losses. And so my intention is to help as many people as I can emotionally complete the pain or the isolation or the loneliness they feel caused by a significant loss of any kind. So what makes me unique is that even though loss is universal, grief is personal. And so I've had 26 years, as I mentioned, with combined experience as a police officer and a holistic practitioner. And I've seen the negative impact that grief has when it goes unrecognized or unexpressed. So I am able to be with people in very difficult situations and listen without trying to fix them, because they're not broken and there's nothing to be fixed. It's just they're going through a natural and normal reaction to a loss. And I'm able to meet them where they are and help them go to where it is that they need to go through. And I have many tools in my toolbox that I share with my clients that are lifelong tools that they can take with them, including the Grief Recovery Method, coaching, visioning, and Reiki and nutrition.
That is an incredible amount of tools that we might not always associate with grief, especially when we're thinking of traditional practices or what counseling or what coaching looks like. On that note, I'm curious as to what you would say for someone who is experiencing grief right now, especially as we're beginning to move out of a pandemic, as we're coming up to significant dates in many people's lives. What would you say if someone is grieving at this moment watching this?
The first thing I would say, and it's ironic that we're doing this show today because today is actually World Suicide Prevention Day, and September is our National Suicide Awareness Month. So I feel like the whole experience that we're going through globally with this pandemic, again, it's perfect in terms of describing what grief is, because yes, the whole world is experiencing this pandemic, but each of us are experiencing it uniquely. So some people are dealing with it from a health perspective, others are dealing with it from a job loss or financial perspective. Other people are any cracks that people had in their lives to begin with addiction or other losses that they're dealing with, marriages that might be not very, healthy at this stage of the game. Those cracks are becoming more apparent. And I really do feel that we haven't seen the full fallout of COVID yet. I feel like because we're still in it. And so I think we just have to remember that we're all dealing with this in our own ways and to lead with kindness as much as we can. But for someone who's dealing with a loss or a grief experience right now, what I would say to them is that you are not alone. There are many, many people and services and tools available to you. It's just grief is, maybe we can define grief later on too, after we talk about helping people that are grieving right now. Grief is just so very misunderstood and people feel very isolated going through grief. So the first thing I would say is that you're not alone. The second is to honor your grief. Most of us try to get through it or bypass it as quickly as we can. I was that person as well with my instances, especially with the adoption. But grief is a normal part of our human range of emotions. And when we don't allow ourselves to feel that, we're also cutting ourselves off from other emotions because we can't selectively numb. So you can't just choose to feel some emotions and not others. If we're going to shut down some, including the painful ones or the ones that are very uncomfortable for us, we're also keeping ourselves from feeling the full capacity of our human range of emotions, including happiness and satisfaction and curiosity and eagerness in our lives. So what happens is our lives become this very narrow range of focus where we try to keep it in this safe little box where we won't be hurt. And ironically, we can't help that. And so what I would say is just honor the grieving process. If you need some assistance, there's many, many people and services available. Please reach out. You are not by yourself. The third thing I would say is that action is the key to recovery. So one of the pieces of misinformation that we learn growing up is that, we hear that cliche, time heals all wounds. And unfortunately, that's not true. Time passes, and what happens is we adapt to the loss over time, but we're not actually healing from the loss. So to actually recover from the emotional incompleteness of a loss, we actually need to take some action, whether that's picking up a phone or reading a book or talking to a counselor or a therapist or a specialist like myself. So action is the key to our recovery, not time. And then the fourth thing I would say is it's never too soon or too late to heal your heart. And so don't be afraid that you feel like too much time has passed, or if you've just recently experienced a loss, it's never too soon or too late to take those action steps.
I absolutely agree. Something we put into practice here at EAG Innovation is talking about how a feeling is a feeling is a feeling, and all the feelings, including grief, deserve validation. You mentioned that you have a unique definition of grief, and I'm wondering if you could share that with folks before we move on to talking about supporting parents and educators during this time.
100%. And I agree with what you said. The feeling is the feeling, and we need to feel our feelings in order to heal them. And so the way that we define grief is that we all understand grief to be the normal and very natural reaction to a loss. But most people have a tendency to equate grief to a death or a divorce. But there's actually more than 40 other life experiences that can create feelings of grief, like losing a job, a medical diagnosis, infertility, moving even, empty nesting, retirement. Pretty much anytime there's a transition or change in our life that can produce feelings of grief, because grief is also the conflicting feelings that we have that are caused by an end of or a change in our familiar pattern of behavior. So when you're talking about COVID right now, that's a perfect example. When we look at everybody's natural way of being or routines that they have been turned upside down. Schooling is different. Healthcare is different. How we go shopping is different. Everything has shifted. And so what I want people to understand is that grief isn't just when, you have the physical death of someone that you love or a divorce, but it can be all of these other normal life experiences that we have, even those ones that we deem positive. So for example, like getting married, I mean, that's fantastic. And a lot of people look forward to that, but it's also an end of your way of being as a single, right? And now things are going to shift with your normal routines. And now you also have to take someone else into consideration when you make plans. And same for retirement, where we're used to getting up and going to a certain workplace every day with the relationships that we have with the people that are there. And when we retire, even though that's viewed as a very positive thing and a lot more freedom, it is an end of all those relationships that we had with those people that we're used to seeing every day, those people that we are used to having a conversation with. It gives us a purpose, to get up every day and go into work. And so there's a transition that happens naturally with that, and that can also be a grief experience. There's also intangible losses like a loss of trust or safety or security, which some people may be experiencing as we go through COVID now. A lot of people had a loss of childhood growing up if they grew up in a household where there was addiction or trauma that happened there. So grief is prevalent, and yet it's, like I said, it still remains this very misunderstood and not very talked about topic of conversation.
Exactly. I appreciate people like you who are just shining awareness on this topic, both frequently within practice. Here, we hear every other emotion but grief because we're unable to apply it. We have a very narrow definition of what grief might look like. So I'm very happy to hear folks just like yourself opening up about grief and what it looks like and how it can be applied to so many different losses and even joys within our lives, which is something we might not always think about. On that note, something you did mention was how we're doing things differently now, and that's the form of grief. You talked about going to school, you talked about the way we care for our children. I'm wondering if you had any words that you'd like to say or resources for parents, caregivers, and educators who are either experiencing grief themselves or are working with children and others who are currently facing a grieving process.
That is a lot, and yes, 100%. So a lot of the work that I do is one-on-one, and now because so much of our work is being done online, so I do offer the grief recovery method, both one-on-one in person and online for people. Also that we have a program called Helping Children Who Grieve. So helping children with loss, especially right now as we go back into schooling and like everywhere from kindergarten all the way up to university, it's very, very different. So, and the teachers are being asked to do this monumental task, and everything, it's hard to have a game plan. It seems like every region has their own way of doing something. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We're not sure if there's going to be a second wave, how long schools are going to be open for. So again, there's no game plan, there's no blueprint. We are really in unprecedented times. So what I would offer for people is just be really open and understand that there's no blueprint here. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others as they go through it, the students, yourself. Ask for help when you need it. I know through the Grief Recovery Institute, I offer that Helping Children with Loss program, which is a 4-week program available to parents and or teachers. And it helps you be able to understand and recognize grief in this sort of redefined way that you and I are discussing here today, and what are the effective tools and action steps that you can take to help children that are dealing with loss. So I personally don't work with people under the age of 18 years old, but I do work with the parents, caregivers, guardians, and teachers, coaches that do work with children so that they are better equipped. And when we do our own grief work, we are better able to stand for our children and be able to recognize and allow them to express in a healthy way their grief at the time that it's occurring, so that they don't end up suppressing or burying those emotions, which is what many of us grew up with understanding.
Yeah. I think it's so important that you mentioned that as adults, parents, caregivers, educators, that we do our own work first. So I'm wondering, if someone is looking to begin working with you, where can they find you?
So I live in the Burlington area, so in southwestern Ontario, I can reach people, but of course, with the magic of the internet, I can reach people anywhere around the world. My website is www.tlclifecoaching.com. I am going to offer you a link so that anybody who's watching the show and would like to know more about the misinformation, there's 6 myths that we learn growing up around grief. So I have a free complimentary ebook for anybody that's interested in that, and feel free to share that with everyone. You don't have to just keep that to yourself. And I'm also available on Facebook under Transitions Life Coaching, and also on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to have you and allow you to come on to break some of these barriers and stigma. I think if there couldn't be a better date to do this. This was absolutely essential information. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Alicia. And again, I honor you for what you do in the work in standing for children and really helping them with that. And I just so appreciate the opportunity to talk about this with you today.
Thank you so much. This video will be available on our YouTube channel this upcoming Sunday, so be sure to check that out as well. We'll be sharing the link for the free resource as well within our comments below. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye everyone.